All right, guys. Want to go over these contracts and the contract cases with you. Contracts are such an important part of life. I feel bad we don't get to go over this in class together, but I just want to kind of make sure we're on the same page and try to kind of wrap this whole contracts thing up and cover some things up. Sorry, I'm a little late getting this onto the website for today, May 1st. I can't believe it's May already. Kind of snuck up on all of us, but anyhow, while I'm on here, just want to wish all the seniors best of luck. Everybody have a good summer, and hopefully we'll get back to some sort of normalcy by next fall. Unless you've really enjoyed this, and if that's the case, then maybe we'll stay on this for next fall. And if you like it, better for you. But I never got into teaching to sit at a desk and talk to you through a computer, so I kind of hope we're back into normal things. Even though I have had a lot of more time and got a lot of stuff done. Anyhow, hope everybody's good and safe. Going to go through this right here with you and kind of go through some of these things and try to tie everything back into and go through these 15 questions. I'll try to keep it somewhat brief so the video doesn't take forever to load. And then I'll bounce back and forth between this PowerPoint here. Okay. So the first thing here is not really on the PowerPoint, but just, what would most likely happen if the judicial system did not step in and resolve contractual disputes. So we've talked about alternative dispute resolution. We have mediation, arbitration, reconciliation, and then of course small claims court, which is where a lot of the torts will go when somebody feels they've been wronged. And a lot of times that can happen through what people feel like they had was a contract in place, right? So if the judicial system did not, you can probably see a lot of people would be taken advantage of: the elderly, the young, the incapacitated, the uneducated. So contracts are there to help us and help others to make sure that they can feel good about going into things. One thing that might happen if the judicial system didn't back up contracts was that people would not enter into contracts, and then what would happen with the phone companies, the dish companies, the rental companies that rent apartments and stuff. If you felt like there was nothing there legally to bind either one of you and back somebody up, then they might just not do it, and that would hurt our economy as well from a business standpoint. So anyhow, that's the first one. Just some thoughts there. Any thoughts had? But Rosalie, healthy, widow, invited Jonathan over for dinner on a Friday night. So we're talking about a casual setting, a social setting, and sometimes social settings in contracts aren't really contracts. But she invites Jonathan over for dinner. He accepts. So in later time, we talk about offer and acceptance more in depth. And there is an offer here and there is acceptance, but really, does that mean there's a contract in place? And usually with social settings, there's not a contract. Okay, but what we look at is consideration. And consideration is what you had to give up in order to complete what you thought was a contract and your end of the contract. And so that's one thing we want to consider here as we look at these first couple. Okay. So Rosalie, a wealthy widow, invited Jonathan over for dinner. First of all, he's an idiot for not going if she's wealthy, money over love all the time. No, I'm just kidding. But anyhow, he accepted. In preparation for the date, he bought a new sports coat, new shoes, and some flowers and some champagne. He arrived at the appointed time only to find that Rosalie had left for the evening. And I'm sorry, he did go, but she wasn't there. Yeah. But for a normal date, so Collins asks Alyssa on a date. Does he assume that he needs to go buy a new sport coat and new shoes and some flowers? He might have been doing all that to just try to impress this wealthy widow, and it wasn't really required. All he really needed to do was show up and have dinner. And so the court would look at this and say, is this consideration? Did you have to go do all that? Did you really change your position financially because of the contract? She didn't ask him to get dressed up and bring flowers. He just chose to. Okay. He's so angry that he wants to sue Rosalie. Of course he does, because she's wealthy. He's trying to get her money. So to recover some of his expenses, will he be successful? And no, he won't. It's a social setting. It's a date. There was no requirement for all these expenses. All he really needed to do was show up. He might be disappointed, and the judge might say, hey, continue to pursue it. Give her another chance. She's got a lot of money. It might be worth your time. But there's no contract there, and there's no lawsuit really valid going to go anywhere. Would Mark have any contractual liability to Anne for doing the following things? Mark stood Anne up for an ordinary date. So again, just a social setting, an ordinary date, probably not anything there. Okay, no liability. Mark stood Ann up for a date to the prom. Now we have a little bit of a difference here, and this is coming from a dad of 3 girls too, who's bought my fair share of prom dates and shoes and modifications of the dresses and all those kind of things and different things to go in the hair and that kind of stuff. So now when you go to the prom, there's a general social idea that you buy a prom style dress and maybe things to go with it. And for the males, maybe rent a tux and those kind of things. So if we flip this and Ansted markup, there could be some costs there associated with some consideration, a change in financial position that happened due to the nature of it. Okay, so all the guys that asked girls to prom and then it didn't happen, they're all going to get sued for the girls going out and buying the dress for that. No, I'm just kidding. With circumstances like we have, that's not going to happen. But in this case, he might be liable for the cost of anything specific to the prom dress, shoes, boutonniere, those kind of things. And again, here for marriage. So engagement, it all depends on when it's at. Mark broke off their engagement for marriage. Was it a week after he asked her? Was it 6 weeks? Was it a year? How far into this was Anne when he broke it off? And if there were extreme costs already taken, she'd already reserved a place and paid for food and all these things and couldn't get the money back. Does she have the right to sue? Maybe. Probably depends on the court. There are some costs there associated. She did have consideration. She'd have a change in financial position. And generally in society, the normal person would say, yeah, you asked her to marry you and then you broke it off. These costs are on you. I don't think that happens very often, and I can't think of any cases to share with you where that has happened. But if you really wanted to push it and you got in the right court with the right judge, you probably could get some financial compensation for their liability and your consideration. As an advertising gimmick, Big Burger hired a plane to fly a banner over the Connecticut beaches, offering $5,000 to any person who would swim from Connecticut to Long Island across the Long Island Sound in less than a day. So here what we have is a unilateral contract. If I find it under here real quick. So this is a promise for an act. Okay, we have these two basic types. Bilateral just means you're gonna give me your truck. I'm gonna give you $10,000, or you're gonna babysit for me. I'm gonna pay you $20. But unilateral, I guess actually that's maybe not the best example. It could be babysitting too. But anyhow, unilateral is a promise for an act. Okay, so you do this act, and when it's completed, I'll pay you. And there's some things that they decided they have to look, and they're like performance, acceptance of the offer, and the contract has become executed. So once you perform this act, like somebody says, I'll give $50 reward for anybody who finds my lost dog. Well, once you find it, that act has been performed. Offer may be revoked until the performance has been completed. But at what point in there is it like, man, I swam halfway across this beach and now you revoke? That's not fair. So typically what courts look at is about 50%. They consider that, justifiable completion. To at that point, there's really no turning back, or they're already invested to a certain level, whatever. If you say, hey, if somebody will build me a garage on my house, that's totally different, because now they're putting up, product and materials and all that kind of stuff. But just for a simple act, like Burger King might say a thing, first one who can answer this question they hear on the radio and bring it in gets a free Whopper. Well, that's an act, so it doesn't really put you at any consideration, or you're not out any cost yourself. But anyhow, that's unilateral. Bilateral is exchange of promise for a promise. And so those are the kind of difference there. So here we have a bilateral contract. And about 4 hours later, when he's about halfway across the sound, he saw another banner flying overhead which said the burger revokes the offer. So they revoked in the same way that they made the offer, which is what you're supposed to do. They did revoke at about halfway. So, where is about halfway? Is he exactly halfway? Is he over halfway? Is he not quite halfway? At the point in time when Mecco Fresh saw the second banner, was there a contract between him and Big Burger? So, I would say no, unless he had completed over half, at least half. And then at that point, it might have been too late to revoke. And we'll see that, I think, a little bit later here on 6, when it's too late to revoke. Projecting ourselves forward, let's assume that he finishes the swim within the day and is now crawling out along Island Shore categorized the contract at this point. It's an executed unilateral contract, and or valid, I guess you could call it, instead of executed. It's not voidable. That contract is not void because they didn't revoke it, and it is express, I would say, because the way it was expressed, not quasi and not implied. Jennifer says to her neighbor Gordon, "If you mow my lawn, I'll pay you $25." Gordon orally accepts his offer. Her offer. Is there a contract? So what we have to look at right now is this unilateral or is this bilateral? If it's unilateral, there's no contract in place right now. If it's bilateral, excuse me, what the heck? There is a contract in place. And so again, if we go back here, exchange of mutual reciprocal promises between entities that entails the performance of an act or forbearance from the performance act with respect to each party. Okay, so the one is going to mow the lawn, the other one is going to pay the cash. Okay, this is made by one party. The offeror promises to do a certain thing if the offeror performs a request act that he or she knows is the basis of a legally enforceable contract. So is it unilateral? Right now, it's a unilateral express contract for just this one individual. On this one, it's for any individual who did, but this one says specifically to Gordon. Okay. The legal significance of the distinction: she doesn't owe the $25 until he mows the lawn. Now, where you might get into some trouble here is now all of a sudden Trey walks up and says, "Hey, I'll mow your lawn for $20." So she says, "All right." And Trey hurries and mows it before Gordon gets a chance to, as he's walking back to his house to get his lawnmower. What happens there contractually? And so there's a lot of details you really have to look at. If it's bilateral, then there's a contract in place, and she can't just send it over to the next person. But if it's unilateral, anybody could kind of take that in a second. And as she accepts that other offer from Trey, she was kind of voiding this contract. But anyhow, this is a very simple concept. There's a lot of things kind of look at in there, but that's the legal significance between bilateral and unilateral. And unilateral, until he does it, let's say he waits till the next day, and then, like I said, Trey walks up and says, "I'll do it for $20," then it's too late, and he can't complete his end, so he can't get the $25. My beloved dog Fido is lost. In hopes of increasing my chances of getting him back, I show a picture of him to all my classes with the same offer. I'll pay a reward of $100 for the return of Fido. This is a unilateral offer. What is the significance of being categorized as such, which means anybody can fulfill it? It's not a contract between one person. Specifically, it's between open offer to anybody. It's express. It's unilateral. And so anybody in my class could find it. Okay, assume you found Fido and are walking up to my house to make the delivery. I see you coming and I yell, "I revoke, I revoke." Once you deliver the dog, am I legally obligated to pay you the $100? And yes, I would be, because at that point you have the dog, you're bringing it up, I can't revoke. Plus, how did I revoke? This is how I made the offer. Typically, revocations have to be in similar things. Do I have that in this presentation anywhere? Sorry, guys, I get the habit of showing this. I only do it once a year, and since we're not together, I can't remember what all's in here. But anyhow, I don't see anything in here about revoking. Must be on some of our other stuff. So typically, you have to revoke in the same way that you made the offer. What if my neighbor found Fido without knowing about the offer of reward, but she later found out about it? Is she legally entitled to the reward? And the answer is no. You still might want to give it to her just to be nice, but if she never got the offer, she can't have acceptance, and she can't complete a unilateral contract without having an offer. And she never heard the express part of it, and then later finds out and comes back and says, "Hey, well, I want my money." Well, you didn't know about it at the time, so you were just being a good neighbor, like State Farm or whatever. And so, at that point, you're not entitled to any money, but you still might give it out just to be nice. You get sick and go to the doctor, who sees you, asks some questions, and gives you a prescription. No discussion occurs regarding price. A few weeks later, you get a bill for $100 in the mail. Was a contract involved here? I would say this is an implied contract. And let me see if I can find those up here. So There's implied in fact, and there's implied in law, which is a quasi-contract. But implied in fact, not expressed but suggested from the facts and circumstances that indicate a mutual intention to contract. So when you go to a doctor, the reasonable person, like court uses the reasonable person theory, is going to assume I'm going to pay, right? And you go to the dentist, the orthodontist, the eye doctor, whatever. You may or may not know what your insurance is going to pay. Oh, heavens, I'm sorry. I really am excited about contracts here. I sound so tired, but anyhow, so the issue here really is the $100. Like, what's the rate? And if the rates aren't posted, if the rates aren't mentioned beforehand, and they charge this, and you think it's too much, they may be in a little bit of a pickle themselves because it wasn't determined up front. In a doctor's office, dentist's office, they don't ever do this. They never tell you up front how much they're going to charge you. You just go and then they bill you. And if you have insurance, they bill them more. But it's it's kind of shady ground a little bit in a lot of ways. And I'd be curious. I should find some examples or some cases to see if how this has turned out for either contract. But a lot of them, for this reason alone, when you sign your paperwork, your new client paperwork or whatever, when you go to new patient paperwork, sorry, they say right on there that if you disagree, you agree to go to mediation, and so you can't take them to court for this kind of things. But one thing we was mentioned in my business law class in college when we talked about this type of thing was, if you think they billed you too much, you can send them a check for the amount you think is fair and say paid in full on the check. If they cash that check, then they've agreed that that's good enough payment. If they don't, and they want more money from you, then they pursue it, you may end up having to pay it. But you have a unilateral here, and if you say you get a bill for $100. So what's going to happen if you go to court is they're going to look at what you had performed, and they're going to probably look at about 5 or 6 different doctor's offices in the same area that do the same, perform the same services, and look and see what they charge. And if it's reasonable, they're probably going to tell you you have to pay that money. If it's extremely high, they might settle somewhere between. And so at that point, you'd have to look at, is it worth going to small claims court over $100 when you're going to pay an attorney more than that if you get representation? So, it might be one of those things where you say, heck, no, I'm not paying $100. You saw me for 5 minutes. You didn't do anything but give me a prescription, and I had to pay for that prescription. Here's $50. And you might get away with that. I don't know if you want to go back to that doctor ever again or not, though, at that point. So you might want to make some of those considerations too when you look at it. And the next time when you go and say, hey, I need to know how much is this going to cost me today. But most people, when they're sick, especially when they're insured, they don't think about that kind of stuff. They just want to get better. So, as a lessee or leasee, you sign a 5-year lease for an office building which contains the following provision. At the end of the term hereof, lessee shall have the right to renew the lease on such terms as can be negotiated between the parties at the time. So you're leaving a lot up here for negotiation and for the timing and all that kind of stuff. And when the lease expires, the landlord refuses to negotiate an extension. Is the landlord bound to anything by virtue of the language quoted? So, what do we have over here about lessee and leasee? Let's see. Can't remember if I have anything in here about this or not. Doesn't look like it. So, I guess a lot of this is really for good in class. I'm not going to find all of it on there, but sometimes you kind of have to use a little bit of common sense too. But so, the hard part here is can be negotiated. So, can be doesn't say must be or will be. So at that point, when the landlord says, I don't really want to negotiate it, he really kind of is negotiating by telling you, I don't want to pursue this extension anymore, which sucks. If you're a business owner and you've gone in and you've painted and put up your signs and done all your stuff, and now you got to move and you lose all the improvements you've done to that building, that's not a good situation. So you'd probably want a little bit better wording in here, like has to be or will be negotiated, or an automatic extension, and this is the prices or whatever. And you just leave it open in negotiation like that. Really, by refusing, he kind of is negotiating, he or she, and I don't think they're bound by any virtue of the language there. Mary, this is kind of interesting thing here, and this is kind of funny. Here in Cedar, we don't have a lot of tract housing, but in California, Texas, a lot of bigger areas, they have a lot of tract housing, and so a lot of the homes look the same. And Nevada and Vegas, Las Vegas as well. Mary lives in a neighborhood where about every 10th home is almost exactly the same. She gets a bid to paint the outside of her house from Paul for $1,500. About 2 months later, she finally decides to accept Paul's bid and calls to make sure it is still open. Paul says it is, and they mutually agree to start work on the following Monday. When Monday comes, Paul mixes up which house belongs to Mary and starts painting an identical house belonging to Steve, which is just kind of funny. If you can only imagine, you walk outside and somebody's painting your house, you're like, what are you doing? But anyhow, when Steve hears all the commotion outside, he goes to investigate. He sees Paul's painting the house. Okay, and right here is where how he reacts once he sees, and if anybody can prove that he sees, is where a lot of the gray area comes in. Paul sees the painting and likes the color. He simply smiles at Paul and goes back into the house. That right there is acceptance. Okay. He asks his wife if she hired someone to paint the house, and she says no, concluding the painter has made some sort of mistake. Steve makes no attempt to stop Paul. When Paul finishes, he presents Steve with a bill for $1,500, and Steve refuses to pay. When Paul gets a call from Mary complaining about his not showing up at that point in time, Paul realizes his mistake. Can he legally collect from Steve? And at that point where Steve had a chance to stop him and did not, he could. Now, could he collect the full $1,500? Depends if Steve's willing to pay it or thinks it's worth it. If Steve does not think it's worth it, he might have to take what he can, which at least is to cover maybe his expenses, but he may not make any profit on the job. Some of the same facts as above, except that Steve and his family are out of town when Paul paints their house and they come home to a big surprise and their house looks radically different. So some of the potential things, if Steve likes it, Paul's out of luck. He's not getting paid unless Steve just decides to just to be nice. Again, maybe covers the cost of paint or something. Steve detests the color of the new house. Paul is also not only not going to get any money from the first one, but he now has to pay the expenses himself to repaint the house back to its original color, which could get kind of sticky too. So that would be a really unfortunate situation there for Paul if that happened. But there's no acceptance if they're out of town and don't know what's going on. At that point, he has no contract with them, but he is liable to fix his mistake if that comes around. You buy a fire insurance policy on your office building. When a fire occurs, you file a claim with your insurance company, but it refuses to take the cover the loss, relying on certain language in the policy. You disagree with its interpretation and read some different language on the policy as providing coverage. Both of you maintaining that your respective interpretations are reasonable within the policy is considered as a whole. Who will likely win? So the big thing here is, I think we did have a little bit about this under on aleatory, a mutual agreement that effects of which are triggered by the occurrence of an uncertain event. So fire, flood, those kind of things. Okay. No precedes one party unless the other party experiences a fire. Okay. So anyhow, that doesn't really answer our question a lot. But what you're buying here is a fire insurance policy. When a fire occurs, you file a claim. That's what it's for. It's for fire. If they try to have what we call lawyer speak, or the small writing, or read the fine print, and it's in such language that maybe only an attorney would understand it, they can't get away with that, and you're still going to get your thing covered. Okay, if it's very clear that it says, if it can be proven that the party themselves started the fire, so somebody threw a cigarette butt, maybe somebody left the burner on in the oven or something like that, then maybe they're going to get out of it. If it's an accidental fire, like lightning strikes in the field next to you, or your neighbor's house starts on fire and comes over fire and burns yours, then that's what the policy is supposed to cover. And that's different. But in general, when you get a fire insurance policy and a fire occurs, the insurance company is going to have to pay, even if they have some little wordy fine print in their lawyer speak that doesn't make sense to you. However, I did have a house in Bountiful, and I had a water flood, and they tried to fight it, saying that because it was from my sprinklers outside, because one of my sprinkler lines broke, and it went into the window well, broke the window, went down into the laundry room, clogged the drain, and then went out into the basement. And I was renting the house at the time to somebody else, so I wasn't there. They were saying that they weren't going to pay, and I was going to have to fight it. But then it came out that I just didn't even have a water policy at all. So my insurance guy really hosed me and Cost me $30,000 to redo my basement. That was a tough lesson learned about insurance. But one thing I'll say about that is don't always get the cheapest policy, get the best policy. So anyhow, Treese was testifying on behalf of his company, Vinda Win Incorporated, before the Washington State Gambling Commission in order to secure a license to make punch boards, game devices. The hearing occurred before a live audience on TV. During his testimony, he said, "I'll pay $100,000 to anyone to find a crooked board. If they find it, I'll pay it." The audience laughed, and Treese thought no more about the offer until he received a phone call from Barnes, who asked if Treese had been serious when he made the statement, and Treese affirmed that he had been serious. Barnes then delivered a crooked board to Vindawin into the Gambling Commission. Barnes sued to enforce the unilateral contract. Was there a live offer created that Barnes could accept? So the court's going to have to really look at a lot of things here, and the judge is going to have to look at a lot of things. But he made a express unilateral contract, and someone fulfilled that unilateral contract, which typically denotes acceptance from the offer that he made. I said contract earlier, but he made an offer. I think we have to look at what we call tongue-in-cheek or sarcasm and those kind of things, and the judges have to say, the reasonable person effect, or the reasonable person rule would say he wasn't serious when he said it. It was just, him talking out of the side of his butt or something. I don't know, but they, there might be some things there, but I think in general, when he makes that statement on TV during his testimony, he's in a courtroom, and kind of held serious for those kind of things. I think he would be held to that and would have to pay it or lose his gaming license, maybe. The Olivers were planning to sell some of their ranch land and mentioned this fact to Southworth, a neighbor. So Southworth expressed interest in purchasing the property and later notified the Olivers that he had the money available to buy it. The Olivers told Southworth they would let him know shortly about the details concerning the sale. The Olivers later sent a letter to Southworth and unknown to Southworth to several other neighbors giving information about the sale, including the price, the location of the property, and amount of acreage involved. The Olivers stated that the information letter had not been intended as an offer, but merely as a starting point for negotiations. Southworth brought suit against the Olivers to enforce the contract. Did a contract exist? So originally, the Olivers just said, "Hey, we're planning on selling some of our land," and mentioned it to him. He said he was interested. Expressing interest is not acceptance. Stating intentions of someday trying to sell part of your land is not an offer. And so there was no contract in place. General rule, advertisements are not an offer. And so you can't accept it by just going and say, yes, I want it. So that even comes into things like Burger King says they have 2 for $5 Whoppers. If you walked in and said, hey, I got this thing in the mail and it says this, and they say, sorry, we've pulled that for whatever reason, and we're not doing that anymore. A lot of people say, oh, that's false advertising, that's bait and switch. You could try to get those two things, and you could try to get a judge to rule in your favor, but advertisements in general are just offers to negotiate. They're not an offer to contract. And so in a lot of cases like this one, the letter that went out to everybody is not an offer specific to Southwoods. It's an intent to start negotiations on the property. So there's not a contract in place there. Anyway, I hope that kind of helps. I think the other worksheets are kind of self-explanatory and kind of cover some things. Like I said, I wish we could have spent more time together in class going over the contracts. We have only a couple more days in class. I'll get the website all the way updated, and we will try to take a small test the last day. It'll be our only test for this quarter, and then we'll be done. We'll be done May 8th, and then you have up to the 22nd to finish everything and get it in for you to go on your grades. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, and have a great weekend. Thanks.